Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good to have you on today's webinar. This is the going to be the 2018 Ultimate Playbook for Recruiting Financial Advisors. I see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list here, so many of you probably sat through previous editions of this where we kind of do a recap of the recruiting environment out there and try to give some tips for everybody on the call that maybe you haven't thought of and stress some areas of importance we feel like that will make a difference in your recruiting. This particular edition will be geared more towards local and complex level recruiting, although we will touch upon some other issues as well, or other media types and strategies that can be used for more regional or national recruiting as well. We will be coming out later in the year with a more national-centric recruiting webinar and do a deep dive into some of the techniques there. But today, we're going to be talking about the boots on the ground level recruiting that many of you at the branch manager or OSJ office level are doing. Before I get too much further along here, let me introduce myself to you. I'm Dave Testerman at Broker Hunter, managing partner and one of the co-founders. Been doing this almost 20 years now and been in the recruiting business for 25 years. So we've seen a lot of technological changes for sure and market changes, but the one thing that has remained constant this whole time is the need for qualified and top talent in the advisory space is still one of the most important things a firm can cultivate. So before I introduce our special guest today, let me do a quick housekeeping items here. We are going to have you will have the ability to minimize your control panel if you can't see the slides. Just make sure you click the little orange button at the top there and it'll slide that over. We are going to be doing a Q&A at the very end. We do want to keep this presentation very conversational and back and forth. So I'll be having a number of polling questions to get a feel for what you all are doing out there in the marketplace, but also please submit questions. There's no way we can cover all the ground in the quick presentation here. And if for some reason we do not get to your questions during the call, I will try to respond to you individually at the end over the next day or so to do so. Again, as I noted, we will be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar as well. So with that being said, I want to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Tony Sirianni, who is the owner and publisher of Advisor Hub. We are close partners with Advisor Hub. They're an excellent online publication for the industry. But in Tony's previous life, he has extensive experience in recruiting. And you can see a number of his accolades here, but he was started in the business as a financial advisor, worked as a branch manager, complex manager, and then actually was a founder of 2 multi-billion-dollar RIAs. So definitely knows what he's talking about when it comes to recruiting, has been there, has been in your shoes, and he's going to share some things that worked for him along the way while he was building his practices that I think you all will find very helpful. Say hello, Tony.
Hey, guys. Thanks for the intro.
You bet, you bet. So I'm going to let Tony jump in here once we get down to the actual branch level recruiting here, but I'm going to go ahead and take a quick poll real quick of the audience here. Let me launch that. And first of all, I want to get a feel for how many financial advisors you all are wanting to hire in 2018. And this will give us a good feel for how big your offices are or your needs. All right, give you a few more minutes here while we're doing that. Good. Okay, so we have a pretty big, it looks like a pretty big audience here. It looks like most of you are in the 1 to 10 range, which for us would be considered kind of your branch or local office, complex office. And then 37-ish%, 11 to 50. And then a few of you out there are far higher with 7% of the audience looking for over 100. So certainly some good numbers there. How you recruit the basic functionality of it's going to be similar. How you source candidates is going to change pretty dramatically depending upon your needs, and I'll jump into that here as we get further into the presentation. So we'll go ahead and close that particular poll out, and we're going to jump to the next slide here. Okay, so for branch level recruiting, here's some obstacles we've identified over the last, decade probably, but they really haven't changed per se. You have 5 major ones here. As you all could see, shrinking industry headcount. As a whole, the industry is shrinking. The advisory space is shrinking. There are some channels within the industry as a whole that are showing some growth, but overall, there's just not nearly as many of them. Technological shift in the industry, both from the recruiting side as well as just on the in the actual financial services business. It's you have consolidating cost. You've got margin compression. Technology's certainly a driver of this, and so those are some headwinds there. Increased cost of recruiting. Recruiting by its very nature typically is an expensive endeavor, particularly when you're looking at hiring multiple or dozens or hundreds of reps. We do see across the board, chronic underspending in certain categories, but understand the true cost of recruiting and understand that it's going up. We have a shrinking pool of talent that everybody desires. They're controlling, far greater assets under management. The recruiting costs are going to go up over the coming years, and they already are. So that's something you have to contend with as well. You have fierce competition. Never talked to anyone of any size out there on the BD or RIA side that has said that they're not recruiting, and most are recruiting feverishly all of the time to grow. It's healthy. It happens. The good news is that the very fact that you're on a call like this, you're putting yourself light years ahead of just most offices out there because they say they're recruiting, doesn't mean they're really doing the necessary day-to-day and month-to-month activities to actually drive candidate flow and are doing it right. So it's a very difficult endeavor. It's probably not something that's done very well part-time, but there is competition out there. And then simply a lack of training. There's not enough new advisors being brought in and trained to offset the attrition the industry is seeing. This is a quote from a couple of years ago, but it's still following this trend. You have the aging of the demographic in the industry. These folks are retiring, at a very substantial clip every year, and so there is going to be year over year, even more increased competition for the remaining talent in the channel. So you all probably all know that, but sometimes it's good to kind of frame this while we're developing our strategy. So while I'm doing that, let's go to the next poll here real quick. And this is going to be geared towards, the presentation here is going to be geared towards predominantly retail producing advisors. So if you can give me an idea here of what you're looking for as far as minimum gross production requirements for your advisors, and if you're on the RIA side, minimum gross fees or assets under management would be kind of give you a ballpark there. So everybody's kind of in the middle. You see, we have a few looking for no minimum requirements on reps, which certainly opens your pool of talent open, and then everybody else is kind of in the middle there, where it's pretty typical. I will say this: even if you are only looking for licensed candidates, period, just without throwing the production out the door altogether, we're just looking for Series 7 licensed talent that's relatively clean U4 to come work. It's still a tiny market. You're really looking at about mid 650,000. I think 635 was the last time of actual licensed FINRA licensed candidates. half of those are back office and support. So we're talking about a very, very small market to begin with, and then when you start putting production requirements in place, your pool of talent shrinks dramatically. So again, the further up the scale you go, the far less candidates you are going to have available in any given market nationally, and we'll touch on that a little bit more on down the road. So there's that. And then as we go here are the moves by channel. We pulled the data from 2016. The 2017 data is not quite out yet. We'll be updating that in a future webinar, but the trend from what we can tell is basically the same. You'll see here, as we touched upon earlier, the independent channel is the one within the FINRA broker-dealer side that's showing some growth year over year. The others there are statistically staying fairly static, and then you have some losses within the wirehouse and insurance sector. If you are in the wirehouse or insurance channel, though, I wouldn't be disheartened by this, because the numbers here of the net number of reps who joined the channel is still very high, and just because the channel as a whole's losing candidates doesn't mean your office has to. So a lot of that, it certainly is a little bit of a headwind. I know in some cases it's by choice. You know, you're cutting lower producers to drive up a higher gross production per rep and assets under management. So some of that's again by choice, but again it's just something to consider as you're putting together your strategy. And then here's another interesting chart that's interesting, and it'll probably give you an idea if you study this a little bit of where your likely recruits are going to come from. So what we see here on this, and these slides in presentation will be recorded and made available to everybody after this, but you see, there's a lot of movement from independent firms to other independent firms, as noted on this chart. Same thing on the institutional side of the house. It looks like there's a lot of movement, and it stays within that. Same thing when you go down to the wirehouse to wirehouse. That's typically where wirehouses are going to find their next recruit. Very rarely, although there is a little bit of movement from the independent channel to the wirehouse, although it's not a very large number, and you can look at the rest of the chart there. So I think that's important when you're identifying your targets, who you're going to market to, who's going to be the type of advisor that's going to be the best prospect for you statistically to have the most success, and that's something to consider as well. It also makes a big difference in how we develop a strategy and advertise and do other messaging to them as well. So we'll move along here, and I'm going to try to get through this presentation fairly quickly so we can leave ample time for Q&A at the end. Here's a little bit of another stat here, basically just reinforcing that certain channels are certainly growing a lot, the RIA channel being one of those for the last few years that has been pulling reps out of the traditional FINRA BD channel. Those reps that are pulled out of the RIA channel, we have seen very little, if any, movement back in. So those typically are gone forever once they leave and kind of go that route. There are a lot of hybrid type BDs, though, out there that will have advisors that do both RIA and traditional BD business, but this chart here is reflective of the pure RIA, giving up your licenses, going straight RIA channel. And so here's a few more stats and some information about that as well. That is the other big channel in the wealth management sector that is showing a net positive growth, though, both the independent channel and the RIA. What it shows us a little bit is that there is a tailwind for reps wanting to at some point look at going into these channels. Certainly not all of them. Individuals have different motivations, but that is something that's occurring year over year. And last but not least, here's a little bit of data about the shrinking number of traditional firms, which would be your traditional broker-dealers. A lot of this is through simple consolidation, though. It's not like a lot of these are quote-unquote going out of business, but it's, you have some consolidation in the industry. We're certainly seeing that on the independent side, particularly among smaller independent broker-dealers. You get cost consolidation the bigger you go, and there's some advantages for them to do that. Same thing with smaller broker-dealers, regulatory cost, DOL, all of those are driving factors in having them consolidate some cost, especially as we get margin compression on fees. We have seen a little bit of this slow down with the market being as good as it is right now. As you all know the joke, don't mistake brains for a bull market and all the bull market jokes. But, there is a little bit of that. Is a lot of times this slows things down because we are getting some margin expansion, even on firms, that aren't growing. That will not continue, and I think we'll see this trend of consolidation pick back up again as markets level out a little bit or if they decline. So that is where we're going to kind of go into, and pause real quick. I'm going to do another poll, then we're going to jump into why do we need to have a playbook, because getting a plan and a playbook is going to be big, because as difficult as this is, either at the local or national level, there's some very basic things you can do, and a lot of recruiting is, we like to say, and a lot of the things you do are simple, but they're not easy. It's kind of like prospecting for high net worth individuals. A lot of it's just rote tasks that you have to do with consistency. You do need to add some things in there that are force multipliers as well. And then also we have to make sure that we acknowledge the behavior of the candidate themselves, and where do we find them, how do they want to engage with firms, and we'll touch upon that here in a moment. But you want to have a playbook, is we don't want empty desks in branch offices. So before I jump into the actual tip section here, and we bring Tony on, I want you to think a little bit about, ponder kind of these questions right here. And then we're going to do the final poll here real quick. I will not bug you with polls here, but these are interesting. Is what I'd like for you to do is, right here, this is a multiple choice, but let me know what you're doing right now to recruit, and what you did last year to recruit, talent. And very good. Okay, I'm glad to see this, because this is going to be a couple of things. Most of you, it looks like right now it's not closed, about 72% are saying referrals. Absolutely love it. You have to do that. 82% saying network, both online and offline. Very good. Half of you are using third-party recruiters. It's great. I'll get into that here in a moment, why that's important. And then digital advertising is coming in at 53%, and then traditional advertising, which would be your standard print and all of that, would be 22%. So good stuff there. Thank you all for that. And Tony, I'm going to bring you back in at this point. We're going to just kind of keep it conversational here and jump back into it. But here are what we have developed as kind of the three cornerstones of branch recruiting. Branches have a unique recruiting challenge, because in many cases the markets that you're in are actually fairly small. So you don't have the luxury of having a ton of candidates to kind of run into. You have to be a little more strategic in how you go about it. And if you're in a really small market, you probably can have 20, 30, 40, 50 potential recruits or less. So, how you go about recruiting them in a way that's sustainable without, scaring them off is certainly a strategy as well that, you kind of have to develop individually. But it starts with this. Before you ever do any advertising or anything else, you want to sit there and leverage the resources you have internally there. And in many cases, that's going to be your existing financial advisors. And Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you right now, as having built branches. Talk to us a little bit about how you went about developing a program.
Well, to be thank you, and to be a branch manager that loves recruiting is to be alone. I mean, you have to really go out there on the ocean by yourself and make it happen. And the first people you recruit are your own advisors. You got to make sure that you have a good branch, a good culture, and that everybody's buying into the program, whatever it is you're doing. And hopefully what you're doing is something that's added value to the advisors. So if you're telling your advisors to make more money, great, but I mean, you have to have a holistic approach. Explain to them how you're training them that they could point to you as somebody who's helped develop them. So, you have to recruit your own advisors first. You mentioned earlier about, sort of the tasks that you have to do. Probably one of the most satisfying meetings I've ever had. Branch managers are in the field, and corporate is corporate, and a lot of times there's a disconnect, or they think they know what's going on in corporate and they tell you what to do, but they don't always. And I was at a meeting once in my consulting life when I was between just having worked at Legg Mason, Smith Barney, and Morgan Stanley, managing director and executive director at those places, and then ended up starting my own RIA. And in between, I had a consulting firm, and would go to sort of, these Fortune 500 firms, big firms that you would know. And they wanted help with recruiting, and I'm at a board meeting with a big table with the CEO and all that. And they said, well, okay. And they paid me a bunch of money to be there. Well, tell us, how do you recruit? I said, well, you have to identify your ideal prospect. You have to develop a compelling story, and you have to make some calls. And then there was like 5 people there. They scheduled an hour to sit down and talk to me. And they said, that's it? I said, that's it. And then one of the guys said to me, he says, he was kind of getting aggravated. And he said, what do we need you for? And I took the piece of paper that I had written those 3 things on, and I gave it to him, and I said, go ahead and do it. The issue is not what to do. Every branch manager worth his salt knows what to do. These are simple tasks, but it's how you approach it that makes all the difference, and how hard you work, how disciplined you are. So when I say identify your prospect, you can't say I'm identifying $1 million prospect, that's the FA that I want, when your branch is full of $300,000 production reps. It's not going to work. He's not going to fit in, or she's not going to fit in. So you got to know every one of those little tasks. There's a whole bunch of subtle differences that you have to really get your arms around to be a good recruiter. It doesn't mean that those 3 things are changed. Those are the things you have to do. But if you're a smart recruiter and a smart branch manager, you're going to really work on developing each one of those.
That's a great point. And I think a little bit of that is when you're developing a recruiting strategy, particularly if you're a branch. I've never talked to a rep that says we don't want $1 million producers, provided they're not, difficult. Everybody wants that. You have to do a little bit of a reality check, though, as Tony alluded to, is, really where is your wheelhouse? Because even when you're recruiting within your strength and sweet spot, it's still a difficult endeavor that requires you to generate a lot of lead flow and a lot of candidate activity. When you get outside of those strengths, your batting average can go down to almost minimal. It almost statistically insignificant. So it's very, very important that if your bread and butter is 150 to 250 reps, that's kind of how you built your practice. It's not to say that if a large producer comes through the door that you don't give it a try, but you do not want to predicate your recruiting success on that. I think we've got to be very, very careful in how you craft and how you go to the market. So to Tony's point here, and he did it succinctly, and it was great, is identify who's in your market. Many of you out here, hopefully everybody has this, but if you're in a smaller, mid-sized market, get a list that's current. I can point you into some directions. We don't sell lists, but we certainly have vendors that do that are great. You have to get that. You've got to get it into some kind of an organized CRM system even before you develop a plan. Tip number 2, we kind of jumped here. Once you've done that, now what you're going to do, as Tony mentioned, your reps are going to be your biggest advocates. Many of them, especially in this industry, they're all coming from somewhere else, so they all have a big network internally. Being able to leverage that and be as a force multiplier for yourself is huge. An introduction from an advisor who has a friend that's an advisor somewhere else is worth 10 that come in cold. They are. If you're only looking for one or two advisors for your office and you already have some, that is probably where you're going to get your next hires. So it's important to do that. Now, that being said, you need to have an incentive reward, not a, hey, we'd love it if you would introduce us from friends. There's got to be a benefit for an advisor to make the calls, to kind of have their feelers out all of the time. Money's always a good one. We're going to touch upon this here right now. It's a good point. But, third-party recruiters charge 6%. That's a bargain if you can fill your office with that, honestly, in this market. That's how difficult it is. So if you would pay a recruiter 6%, but you're giving away a $250 gift card to TJ Applebee's, that's probably not enough incentive to get somebody to be out there beating the bushes for you. So it's important that you make sure that you have some incentive programs that are meaningful enough where somebody's going to care to contact their friends. And then we will be harping upon this constantly through this. Probably the greatest one is none of this works if you do it for a month or two. This is probably the best thing. Is probably like working out or exercising. This is from here on out. As long as you're in a recruiting role, this cadence or consistency is going to be something that you're just going to have to get in the habit of doing. Quarterly, monthly is probably overkill for this, but that cadence of doing this consistently is what's ultimately going to win the day. Many of you know this, but these reps typically take, what we found in our traditional recruiting side of the house, it's a 9-month sales cycle to get somebody from point of first contact to actually moving. A lot of them are a lot longer than that. Every once in a while, it's shorter if there's an extenuating circumstance. But this is a long-term proposition. But it starts now. It starts with consistency. You got to set KPIs for yourself on a recruiting side. Set some goals. Say, hey, look, I want from my advisors for them to send me, 5 potential recruits this quarter, and work towards that goal. And long term, that'll reap dividends for you. This is going to be the most important thing for those of you who said they're looking for 1 or 2 or 3 reps. Hands down, this is likely where you're going to find them. A lot of the other techniques we do are going to be for high volume or once you've tapped that initial network that you have. Tony, anything you want to add to the referral part of this?
Nothing than just to repeat that it's, the best referrals are going to come from within, and advisors, you mentioned earlier about make sure that they're people that you like. You should absolutely have a no jerk policy, because if an advisor is a jerk, his clients are jerks. And if the advisor is a good person, his clients or her clients are going to be good people too. And you want to surround yourself with good people. And if you bring a jerk into your branch, you're going to lose the respect of the advisors that you have. So it matters, and who's going to get along. It's never worth. I know you get pressure to hire people, but it almost always works out badly when you make a quick decision. And by the way, if somebody wants to move quicker than 6 or 9 months, you probably don't want them. There's something going on.
There's a circumstance and there are some that we'll get to, but yes, I agree with you. There's usually a reason if it's quicker than that. So again, this isn't an instant gratification type of endeavor we're undertaking here, but usually nothing worthwhile is. I did want to touch upon the role of third-party recruiters in all of this, because they kind of get thrown into the mix here, but I think referrals is where I'm going to place them. I'm a big advocate of third-party recruiters. We actually do some of that work ourselves, But here's the reason why: is there's a pretty big percentage of candidates out there that will absolutely not work directly with a firm when they're moving. It was actually far higher until we got into this. I didn't realize how high it was. I think it's close to 50% of the candidates out there will absolutely want to be represented in a lot of cases with that intermediary type of relationship. They feel like they can get a better deal. They don't have to do the legwork. They can keep a little bit of distance. There's a number of reasons why they do that, but you do want to, where you can, add that type of lead flow or referral flow in. Downsides of using third-party recruiters is the market right now is 6% of trailing 12. In most firms, that's up front. So if that's going to be cost prohibitive for you, it might be difficult to find one that you can work with. And normally, it's very difficult to get, unless you're in a major market or you're regional or national, to get a recruiter to work on one-off type positions. There's a lot of reasons, but pipelining is one of them. It's very difficult to just work on one position. But where it's applicable, it's a very nice supplement to have some other folks out there sending you leads. You certainly want to do all of the other things as well and not rely on that, because in most cases the recruiter represents the candidate. But if you're not engaging with some recruiters there, you are going to miss some candidates that you normally would never have a chance at. So we throw them under the referral network, for lack of a better category. So that's it on referrals. Now the next one here is networking. And Tony, I'm going to ask you here in a minute, what are some things that you maybe did in the past offline to network with advisors? Is there anything you found that would be a good place to maybe rub elbows with some of these prospects?
I think it really depends on where you are. I mean, if you're a branch manager, you should be a hail fellow well met at just about everything from, church to clubs to, everything in the community. And you should do some charity work and things that you actually believe in, just to sort of put yourself out there. And again, it depends on the community you're in, the size of it and all that, but there's an awful lot to do. People tend to park their boats next to each other. Those people are all usually pretty wealthy. So those are good things. I know if you're starting out and you don't have the wherewithal to do it, you can get involved in different rotaries and things like that. But you have to build a local reputation, and you have to be somebody that people can count on. I think this is harder today. They keep switching branch managers around and sometimes don't give them an opportunity to sort of put down real roots in a community. But if you're lucky enough to have done that, I think that's the critical piece.
Yeah, very good. And I think the smaller the market you're in, the more important this is. As we talked about earlier, if you whittle down your target audience and it's 50 potential prospects, I'm a big fan of reaching out in a very low key way and trying to make contact with somebody via phone. If it's a small, tiny market, you want to do it in a very low key fashion. But the bottom line is people want to work and join and do business with other people that they like. So just getting to know the advisors in your local market the best you can, at least, holding an olive branch out there and saying, hey, look, I'd love to talk to you sometime. Just one professional colleague is another, and you can keep it really low key. They know if they ever want to look around, they know who to call. So that can almost go without saying. Same thing goes with networking. Small market. Join the country club. There's 2 of them. That's where everybody that plays golf is going to hang out. And there's some things there you can do, as Tony said. Being visible in the community. It's good for a lot of reasons. Attracting clients, one of them, but just meeting other advisors there, getting to know them. Recruiting is very, very timing oriented. We'll touch on that here in a minute. But at any given time, there's only about 10 or 15% that are even entertaining looking, or even able to move, especially in the wirehouse channel. They're probably in the middle of a deal, on a deal, at some point within it. So very, very timing oriented. Also, making a moves, even on the independent sides, it's difficult. You have to, move your clients. There's a lot of things, barriers in place that are going to, keep somebody, grounded or, staying put at their current broker dealer, even if they're not happy. We see it all the time. It's kind of the devil, So that's where being out there consistently, is going to be huge. Now, what do you do if you're in a bigger market where you have, 5,000 reps, 10,000, you're regional, there's 20, 30, 40,000. Okay, that's where it gets a little more tricky. Online networking, to me, and we've tried it all here at Broker Hunter, you have to go where the candidates hang out or the prospects or advisors hang out. Other social media platforms really don't yield very good results. However, LinkedIn is one that definitely I feel like from a professional standpoint makes a lot of sense. So you get the list that we talked about earlier, identify your target prospects. First thing you ought to do is if you don't have an online profile on LinkedIn, get one, put it out there, make it super easy for somebody to reach you. Once they link in with you, they'll have their contact info, and then just, again, low key. I don't want to tell everybody how to go about it because I'm sure you all probably know, but just half the battle is just making yourself accessible and name recognition. I mean, if they don't know who you are, they're not going to call or reach out to you when that happens. An example of this is how powerful LinkedIn is. At Broker Hunter, we were able to build a group relatively easy. Now, it's changed since then. We kind of got in the very beginning, but we have 125,000 financial professionals in our LinkedIn groups. And I'm saying this not to brag, but if we can do it, you can do it. It wasn't anything. It was something we did consistently over time, over the years, and you grew it with content, and then these groups themselves create their own content. So it certainly can be done at a local level. And the other little neat tip about that is once you're linked in with them, it allows you to message them and completely go around any firewalls or work addresses or anything, which is huge from a recruiting standpoint. Again, don't abuse it, though. It's when you abuse something is when it loses its effectiveness. So as long as, you're low-key about it, providing some value, and you're there when somebody wants to make a move, you can certainly be ready to pounce when they do. All right, tip number 3. This is a little more for regional or national recruiting. Probably not so much for an individual branch office, although you would certainly benefit from that, but informational webinars, an example of which is what we're doing right now. Unbelievably powerful for recruiting financial advisors for 2 reasons. One is you're fighting their inherent lack of interest in going to actual physical events for a number of reasons. They can do it from their desktop, and it's anonymous. The way we capture data on our webinars, the way you can do it on yours, it's completely non-threatening to them. You can simply ask for an email. It's wonderful on all fronts. As a matter of fact, you can cover so much ground on a webinar nationally that it would almost be impossible to do anything else to generate that kind of lead flow. You literally can get, if you execute them properly, a year's worth of leads at once. So something to think about as you're going into the year, particularly on regional or national, that this is something, leveraging this is big. Now, what we're talking about here as well, all of this is going to be about what we call candidate sourcing. We're not talking here about the actual recruiting process once you get a lead and you start taking them down. We are working on talking about some best practices there in a separate webinar of, what do you do? Okay, you've got a live recruit here that's perfect for your firm, and we're going to work on that at a later date. So this is all going to be sourcing related, but from a sourcing standpoint, these things are absolutely huge from a networking. And then kind of cross-pollinating webinars really kind of fall into this as well. And this is a a topic that we certainly hold near and dear to our hearts, but digital advertising. I kind of go through this, and when we first started Broker Hunter, it was literally, I mean, there were most of the branch managers we talked with and worked with literally didn't even know how to get on the internet. I mean, it was 20 years ago, 19 years ago. I mean, it was funny. Their assistants did, and they would help and show them, here's how this works. And I had numerous people say, well, advisors will never use the internet. It's too hard. It's just not going to work. Well, we've known what's happened in the last 19 years. So I'm dating myself by saying this, but there's no longer any dispute as to how people consume content anymore. It's been settled. You can read about it. It was originally coined here. You call it the ZMOT. That's called the zero moment of truth. That's a Google term when they were introducing this concept of digital advertising, that advertising buying behavior has changed forever. Now everybody goes online prior to reaching out to you. So that's not print media either. This is online media content. You've got to do it. It's just devastating to your recruiting if you're not doing it at some level. We see this time and time again. The amount of one is it's playing on. Let me back up here real quick. They've done studies that buyers want to do research about before they ever reach out. They want to know as much as they possibly can about you. So they want to know about, your deals and comps. They're going to read reviews if there's a place to get them. They want to talk to, read reviews from other employees that have worked there. They want to find out about management structure. They're going to read news independent of you about your firm. All of this is going on whether or not you know that it's going on or not. So it's important that you stay in front of this and that you actually offer, an ability or a platform. Now, at the branch level, there's only a few simple things you can do, but you have to do them. And then at the regional or national level, there's a whole other set of things you can do. But I always kind of look at recruiting from a firm perspective as you need to have a top-down effort, and then you need to have a grassroots effort going on. You can't have one without the other. You've got to have both. Top-down would be, the firm as a whole doing, branding initiatives, doing general outreach to the market, typically at a national or regional level. This can be either in lead flow or lead generating type of activities like webinars, white papers, or it can be just general branding to let people know, put your name at the top of their mind and make sure that, one, they know who you are. I think that's a big battle for a lot of firms that are smaller, or more importantly, to dispel any negative attachment they may have. They may have a certain negative connotation about a certain firm XYZ that's maybe not accurate. And so there's constantly that. We are in a tiny, tiny market, though, as far as numbers of people. So that's the good news is when you're advertising, it's not like you have hundreds and hundreds of options and publications and different demographics. I mean, it's not very many of them where reps congregate. And Tony has kind of coined this. We talked about this in the past, but I think he said, you want to be in places where money's in motion. And so where is money in motion? And when we say money in motion is where do recruits or advisors that potentially could be evaluating new opportunities, where would they hang out on the web or where would they find information about you? And so this is where these various media items come into play. And I'll show you some examples of this and how they play in to your recruitment. But here's some ideas for you and some different things that you can do both at the firm level and at the branch level to make sure that it's quite simply easy to find you. So if you ever do a Google search of your branch or your region and you're trying to find out information about you and you're having a hard time on Google, we need to fix that quick, because that is devastating to your recruiting sourcing to not have that kind of lead flow. Another thing that we've seen is, again, there's a pretty big percentage of candidates from their behavior that are going to actually respond directly to firms through digital advertising. We see it every day. And so if you're not doing that, that's a whole group of candidates that just are not going to be accessible to you. So, Tony, what would you like to add in here? And I know that you had successfully in the past had mentioned to me one time about how you built your RIAs from scratch. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, I definitely used advertising and PR to do it. I mean, there is a national conversation going on, so I'm not trying to plug Advisor Hub. I think it's a place that's where this conversation is happening. And you want to make sure that there's an equality there, where a big firm and a small firm can be on the same playing field. And I think that the internet has created that. And I think when you have, depending on the opportunity, you have to advertise, like, we have this deals and comp page, we show kind of everybody's deals. That's an open marketplace. There's a lot of transparency there, and it's firm versus firm. A small firm can compete with a big firm, and that just wasn't possible before. And today, you do have that opportunity. And what I did, to get, the firms I worked with in the media, we did, I wrote articles, I did a lot of native content, and I tried to write about things that were important to advisors. I made myself an expert just by, talking through experience of how this worked for me, and, but it was real. So you have to talk about something you have a passion about, stories like, I would write about, what to watch out for in equity transactions when you're going independent. What do they mean when they say they're going to give you stock? What is that? Can you take that for, is it real? Is it not real? And what things you have to watch out for. So that was a very popular article, and I didn't advertise myself or my firm in it, but I just gave my opinion, and at the bottom was my name. And that was, doing that on a regular basis was a very effective tool. I think it helped a lot of people, but at the same time, it certainly built my reputation and my firm's reputation. And anything you can do to put yourself in the position of educator or expert will really help you, especially if you're a small firm and you're struggling for eyeball space and you need to get noticed, and you're not going to be, sponsoring a golf tournament, nationally. These are good things to do. The benefit and the curse of we have a small group of people we need to get in front of. You don't need to have a national audience. You need to have a national audience of advisors. And you don't need every advisor. You need advisors that are producing, right? So this is sort of a smallish group of folks that you can be in front of, and you likely know the business better than you think, and you likely have really good opinions that would benefit other people. And I think having the internet there is an opportunity for everybody. But advertising and PR, by the way, I would just add, is a complement to what you're doing. It can't take the place of doing it, but it certainly helps you, because as you build your reputation, you start making these calls. Your calls become easier. You can, if you have something, when we have somebody write something, we put it in Advisor Hub, they tell, this is a billboard on a road that nobody drives by unless you tell them. So if you tell people, hey, I just published this article in Advisor Hub, then you have a whole bunch of people coming to read it. It's a third-party endorsement for how smart you are or whatever. And that's what really helps you drive the recruiting. It's the PR working for you.
Absolutely. You've got to, you regardless of how big or small you are, but even more importantly, the smaller the firm, or maybe you don't have the brand name, developing and getting a force multiplier is huge. Because, I mean, literally, a recruiter, to us, we've always looked at it this way. There's sourcing and then there's recruiting. The skill of a top recruiter within your organization is taking qualified recruits through the process, which is very involved, and there's a lot of back and forth, and that's where the people skills comes in. If you're not generating enough qualified leads for them, then that's the breakdown. And this is where these various techniques we're going over today will act as force multipliers. A good rule of thumb, it's not perfect, but I'd say it's probably pretty close for most firms, is you're going to close 1 out of every 10 qualified recruits that you have in your pipeline. 1 out of 10. You may do a little better, you may do a little worse, but it's going to be somewhere in there, in that ballpark. That's what we've experienced with our clients. Whether you have a great deal, probably maybe a little better, but it's going to be right around there. So simply, you can do the math on the back of a piece of a napkin. If you want to hire 10 recruits, you have to tomorrow get 100 qualified candidates in the pipeline, and even then, you're 9 months out from having them starting to convert typically. So, we laugh that, really, in a lot of respects, when we're starting 2018 recruiting, if we're starting 2018 recruiting now, this activities we do today are going to influence probably fourth quarter hires. But in reality, a lot of them that we're going to be sourcing right now are 2019 hires. I know that can be a little discouraging, but, you have to get going on this and not let another day go by where you're not implementing these techniques. Okay, now here's the wild card where advertising is just, you have to do it. And you have your day-to-day advertising going on, and you'll get lead flow, but you'll have dislocative events occur. And we don't know when they're going to happen. I'm going to give an example of it last year, but a very good independent BD, National Planning, was purchased by LPL, another great firm. What happens, though, is that a very big percentage of the reps at National Planning, for whatever reason, maybe they used to work at LPL, for whatever reason, they don't want to go to LPL. That's an example of a dislocative event. Now, these are happening all the time. This just so happened to be a huge one. If you all subscribe to Advisor Hub, there was an article on there the other day about this and some of the other news publications. There were Securities America, the Advisor Group, and several other BDs that hired 300 or 400 of these advisors basically in one quarter. Now you're sitting there saying, well, either we got some or wow, it would have been nice to have gotten, been in the conversation with those recruits. That's where advertising and all of this stuff we're talking about come into play, because, a market that's, choppy or trading flat, or, firms liquidating, or mergers and acquisitions, all of these create these events that'll happen, and you can't react to them fast enough to do anything about it. You might think, oh, I'm going to hear about it on the news and I'm going to, start a cold call campaign. Well, good luck getting through to them, because everybody else is doing that. But in a lot of cases, these advisors already know it's coming down the pipe, and they're already in play long before that. The only way we know to do that effectively, especially on a national stage, is you better have advertising traps set all over the place where they hang out, so that the second that these types of events occur, you can be in the conversation and be one of the firms that they're evaluating. And it's really as simple as that. You've got to do it, though. There's some nuances to it, and we'll certainly talk about that one-on-one if you would like. But that's where I say tip number one. And I'm not even going to say Broker Hunter or Advisor Hub, although we're very biased, but I'm going to say, if you are not advertising, and it looked like about half of you weren't somewhere, please don't, give yourself a chance to get these reps that are out there doing searches. It can be something very simple as a job posting on a branch level, all the way up to some of the more involved things that we do at the macro or the national level. You want to sell your unique selling proposition, your culture. Do not, everybody knows what an advisor does, et cetera. You've got to focus on what's in it for them. A rep that is, I'm going to try to put a fairly typical, not even necessarily an outlier, but, a rep doing $500,000 in production on $50 million in assets with a clean U4, let's say their business is, a great business mix, that person can go work anywhere. It's a complete different, you're really selling them on your opportunity, your capabilities at the branch level, your culture, Tony probably had mentioned that, how you have helped other reps grow their business. It's got to be about them, not really you, although selling you is a part of getting to the point where you can sell them. So, I think focus on that in all that you do, what you can do to help develop and grow their practice. On the independent side, it's very much that, it's about them and how, what resources you have and everything to grow. I think that's going to be paramount. And I think it's a huge advantage at the local level, because ultimately, if somebody's going to come work with you or within your office environment, they have to like you. They've got to buy into the culture, or it just is going to stop right there. It almost, and we've seen it before, that takes precedence over even the firm in a lot of cases. And I know most of you have probably seen that, where a manager will leave and he takes all the reps with him because they like working for that manager. The firm almost doesn't matter. It's kind of like your client, which to me is a huge advantage for a branch office, that if you have that type of culture, that's something that could certainly be leveraged. Tony, do you have anything to add in on the kind of selling culture and the help you can provide?
Well, I think it's come full circle, and I think as the deals sort of go down, there's a definite leveling of the playing field now. And you have firms like Stifel and FPL and all that. They've got the same deals, if not better, than the wirehouses. So when I first started my RIAs, we didn't have an upfront deal or anything like that. So you had it. Culture was it. This is you can do business better here. It's more fun, all that kind of good stuff. And I think today, culture is again important, because without it, why am I moving? There were people who were motivated by deals, right? But it's going to be much, much harder today. And today, I think it's all about culture. So if you haven't figured out what your unique value proposition in your office is, or if you can't go to your FAs and each one of them says something that's very similar to the other one about you and the branch, you've got a problem.
I agree totally. Now, let's not, but we don't want to say it. The deals are important. It's just when they're all equal. You do not want to be away from the market on deals. We can talk a little bit about that individually. I'll give everybody a link here after this where you can schedule a call. And I'd love to find out a little bit more about you individually. We can give you some tips based on where you are. But all things being equal, it's not about the money unless it's not equal, and then it can be. So I think that's important. But Tony nailed it. I think a lot of this has become homogenized, and really the only differentiating factor is the very fact that you're you, and there's only one you, and that's what you're selling, and it's great because it's something that you can definitely convey and help a rep grow. All right, and then I've got a lot of questions here, and I've rambled on probably too long on this, but here's my last tip. Again, we'd love to see you advertise with us at some point, but even if not, I cringe when I talk to somebody and you're not advertising somewhere. I would rather you say, I'm advertising over here, but it's not working, or it is. Maybe let's look at this. I can live with that. But you literally are eliminating 1/3 to 50% of the potential candidates that you have a chance at if you're not advertising. And we have 20 years of stats to back that up. So if you can get by with 50% less leads, then by all means, don't advertise. But it can be far higher than that depending on what you're doing. So again, let's jump right into the Q&A. And there's some great questions here that I want to get to. And there's a bunch of them. Okay, so let me jump in. All right, hold on. All right, so let's jump right in here. I had one person ask me, what are the differences between paying a contingent versus a retained search? So that's going to go back to kind of the referral channel, and I believe they're talking about third-party recruiters. Well, that's a great question. Okay, so here's the predominant difference, and here's a way to look at it. When you're paying contingency, you're basically telling a recruiter, hey, we'll pay you 6% if you bring us an advisor. You're not paying anybody before or anything, and that's fine, and it's a fairly common structure. And it's, if you're wanting to hire one or two, it may work. You do not get any competitive advantage doing that because everybody pays 6% on the street. Or there's a few firms that just don't pay recruiting fees at all, and then they don't ever get any recruits. So from third-party recruiters. But when you're working on a contingency basis, normally recruiters really they're representing the client. They're representing the candidate, and they are normally shopping that candidate around to multiple ones, depending on what the candidate wants to do. And so it's a contingency basis. Retained can take a lot of different forms, depending on how it works. Some of them you'll hear people say what they call an RPO, or recruitment process, outsourced deal, which is common in other industries, where you hire maybe a panel of callers or a recruiter for a project period, or you put them on a contract to basically act as a recruiter for you on your behalf. They can be structured similar to, there is certainly a performance aspect of it, but, for instance, in a lot of cases, you're saying, hey, we don't want you shopping this candidate around all over the place in the independent channel. We want you to send them to us, or in a lot of cases, you'll have a handful, maybe 3 or 4 different firms that you work with, and that's pretty common there. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. And again, there's some nuances to it that are individual. But I will say that for branch offices to go and engage with recruiters on a one-off deal is going to be hard. It's certainly not a bad idea to let them know that, hey, if you find somebody, we'd love to talk to them and we'll pay. But I wouldn't put a lot of stock into that it's going to be a magic bullet, for you to hire 10 people in most cases. Again, there's exceptions. But what I think we try to convey is that there's really no magic bullets to any of this. You're going to have to do a lot of these different things, and sometimes one will work better for a while, and then another one. What we find out with advertising, which is funny, especially if you're really advertising high end, is it kind of doesn't work. It feels like sometimes until all of a sudden it does, and then wow, you want it to work again immediately, and it may be 6 months before that particular channel. So it's really important that you do all of these things, particularly, if you're doing regional or national recruiting. Okay, so here's another question here. We're looking to pay a recruiter 7 to 8% to help us find 3 or 4 advisors at a California RIA. As a small firm, we can't pay up front. Well, we will pay every month for 13 months to get a 7 to 8%. Is this attractive to recruiters? Yeah, maybe. Again, I don't think it would hurt to let a recruiter in your area know that that's a possibility. I think a lot of times recruiters, as far as fees go, will work with you on fees within reason. I think when you back off the 6%, I can't imagine any recruiter in this industry that's been doing it for any time to do that. But again, there's different deal structures that you can do. In addition to that, if you're only looking to hire 3 or 4, there's probably some other things you need to do in conjunction with that to try to see if you can find some on your own as well. But I think getting and again, everybody has different business models, but I think most business models we've seen over the years that if you can hire a producer at 6 and pay 6% or 7%, if that's what your blended cost of sale is, it's a home run. You do it as many times as you can. The problem is even then you can't. And honestly, we're seeing recruiting fees in the industry going up. I think you'll probably see the norm here in a few more years, probably 7 or 8% recruiting fees. There's a few firms that are starting to do it now. Again, it's just a function of the scarcity of the market that it's getting harder to move them, particularly with the broker protocol issues going on. Excuse me. And, I think that will not be uncommon. But again, I think, our objective is we convey to clients is, if you have 10 spots that you need to fill, we need to fill those 10 spots, and then we'll worry about your cost per hire within reason, the next year. You know, what we normally see is, in most cases with recruiting advisors, is, you know, hey, we want to hire 10. We only hired one last year, so they were off by 9, but they didn't pay any recruiting fees. Well, I mean, that's kind of missing the point. So, only once we're hitting goals do we in most cases need to worry about that. I think in a lot of cases too, in this particular case here with the person from California, to me, if you're only looking for 3 or 4, I mean, you might be able to pick up one of them just doing some simple advertising, and then, you know, using a recruiter or something along those lines to supplement. So there's some strategy here with, depending on where you're located, that's going to dictate the types of strategies we use for our clients and what we would recommend. So I think, Tony, what are your thoughts on kind of what you're seeing out there right now as far as best sources of candidates for your clients?
Well, I think, what you're saying is true. It's a mix of, using recruiters, using internal referrals, and I think, the advertising. For us, obviously, we see a lot come through nationally. So I don't know that we're skewered in our vision, but we see an awful lot of people who want recruits, and they text or want to find out where to go, and they text us because they're looking around. So, we have a lot of that. I do see issues out there in the marketplace in general. I do think that you can strike a deal with a recruiter, but you have to make sure they understand your story, so they're telling your story the way you want them to tell them, especially if you're an independent RIA and you have an interesting story to tell. You have to really be sure that you educate the recruiter as to what you need to say, and that you guys have agreed upon a framework of what to talk about, or else you're going to get the wrong kind of recruit. So, and that's why a lot of these guys take retainers up front, because they need to be able to spend time learning your story, understanding your firm, and then promoting your firm. It's easy to promote, Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley because they're everything to everybody, and your firm is not. Your firm is probably very specific, and you better make sure that the recruiter understands what you want.
And that's a good point. Tony made, and something certainly we've had to address before, is that you have to remember that when you hire a recruiter, especially somebody that's capable, okay, that's successful, been doing it, huge network and all that, they are still in most likelihood a year out from when they start working with you on them starting to generate fees enough where a retainer covers that, but there's a ton of front end work. So for a recruiter to take on a client, especially a big one that's going to require a lot of resources, it's an incredible risk to them to not do that, because one is, if they have never worked with you or know your story or have had success, they're taking an incredible amount of risk to dedicate their time and resources and expertise, on a contingency basis that may or may not pan out. And then on the flip side, as a firm, you're doing the same thing. So that's where a retainer type situation, and a lot of times when we've done them in the past, is we've actually forgiven the retainer against fees. So it all comes out in the wash, but it's very, very important that, you commit to that process. We have it every day. Hey, if you find somebody, will you give us the name and we'll pay you a fee? That's not a very good strategy probably for you or a recruiter to engage in. But then on the flip side, depending on, the market you're in and how many you want to hire, I don't think writing a bunch of money up front as a retainer is probably a good idea. I think there's a happy medium there. Normally, most of the recruiters that I've worked with, and that certainly the firms that we've worked with in that capacity, it's always at the national level. And then as candidates get submitted into the national level, then they get distributed out to the branches rather than just working at the local branch level. Not to say it can't be done. It's just you kind of have to look at everybody's perspective on, the risk involved. So while I think when somebody's coming in and saying, hey, we will pay 7 or 8% or something like that, it certainly is an attractive number provided you actually make a placement there. And that's where recruiters can get a little bit, you'll talk to them, and I've heard a lot of complaints. Oh, we talked to a couple of recruiters and they never send us anybody, or we never heard from them again, or I don't think they were working for us. Well, they aren't working for you probably anyway, unless you're paying a retainer and you'd outline that type of a situation anyway. So I think that's a little bit of there's been a little bit of a misunderstanding, I guess, a lot of times of what an actual recruiter does. And I think a recruiter is probably best looked on as like a sports agent. They represent the candidate, and in a contingency basis, that's probably the best way to frame them. I think it's a talent agent for the advisor, and but again, I think, as Tony had pointed out too, you need to do a little bit of all of this in order to generate enough lead flow. So, kind of coming back and talking, specific numbers, and we've gone over. You guys can hang up whenever you'd like, but we can talk about this all day. So, and we're here until the questions quit coming in. But, excuse me, so I think let me get back to where I was at. So from a recruiter standpoint, I think it's important to put some irons in the fire, but don't rely on that as your primary source. I like to look at it in buckets because we see this all the time. There's a lot of candidates that absolutely will not work directly with a firm, and they want to work with a recruiter. So if you want access to those candidates, you better have some recruiters on your bench. The bigger they are, meaning either OSJ offices wanting to move, teams, the more likely they are to be working with a recruiter in most cases. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that, if you do not have those relationships, you very well may miss out on some candidates there. Probably the next thing that is probably something to make sure that everybody's doing, again, is making sure that you're kind of covering all three of these bases here. And, usually if you'll do that, at that point we can kind of optimize the campaigns over time, and you can get a good feel for what works for your individual circumstance or not. Let me go get another question here. All right, next question here. We have a bunch of them, and let me go down here and see. What's my take on leaving the protocol, and how may it affect rep movement? I'm going to let Tony take this one. Tony, what are your thoughts on the protocol?
Well, I think it's already had a chilling effect on movement of reps. But I think it's probably the largest issue that's facing advisor movement now. The arguments that are starting to be made against it are new. It's not just the protocol. The real contention here, and the protocol, for people who don't know, that was the thing that allowed you to go from firm to firm that all the big firms had signed, and allowed you to move freely as long as you took a limited amount of information, client name, the telephone number, and I think you can take the list of the accounts, the type of accounts that they had open. So that was a way that kept firms from suing each other every 2 minutes, which was the way it was done before. But what had been added, I think, on purpose, obviously, between when protocol started and now, was a whole bunch of non-compete language in every type of contract, including in your commission contract with the firm each year. All of a sudden, now you have a non-compete. So they're treating financial advisors as if they were, M&A guys, or if they were hedge fund guys. They're the arguments that are being made now to go against these employment contracts that have been put in, where you have to take a year off from your firm, that'll destroy it. Advisors will go out of business. it's in Advisor Hub. Everybody should look at it because it's in the last article. But they're saying, look, how can these firms all of a sudden turn around and say that you can't take names from a firm? The last guy they sued was somebody from Morgan Stanley who left from Merrill Lynch years ago, took his names and numbers to Morgan Stanley. Now Morgan Stanley is suing him for taking his names and numbers away. And it's a goose is good for the goose, good for the gander type of defense. They're saying, you said this was okay 5 years ago. Now you're saying it's not okay. Now you're saying that a client's number is a trade secret. How can a client's number be a trade secret? It doesn't make any sense. The also thing that they're sort of hitting on now is that these non-competes were really unfairly put upon people. You tell people you have to sign this or you're not going to get paid. Well, what can they do? You can't, as you just mentioned, it takes a year to move your business. You can't move the business precipitously. It hurts the client. So it's really not fair. I think the overall practical argument that you see, there was a judge in Texas recently that ruled that clients basically deserve a choice, that these temporary restraining orders are not valid. I think that's where this thing is going to go. I think, as long as we keep covering it in the press and you advisors keep, pushing it and talking about it, I think FINRA is going to have to make protocol mandatory. They're going to have, clients are allowed to move, advisors are allowed to move. It's freedom of work. And this is not a job with trade secrets because we advertise everything. Matter of fact, our job should be all about transparency, shouldn't it? Is there a trade secret to selling? You pick up the phone, call people with money, and ask them to come work with you. There's not a lot of trade secrets that an advisor would know. And I just think that that's absolutely ridiculous. And I think eventually judges will think it's ridiculous. Right now, the judges are focused on the contracts themselves, which are extremely binding. And, we're all probably dumb for having signed them, but you kind of got no choice. So I think that's the big issue right now.
They've had some in years past. I know there's been several instances a long time ago before the DOL here in Georgia of that going on, and I remember a few cases where basically when it actually goes to a court and not an arbitration panel, judges in almost every case rule that, hey, look, a client can do whatever they want with their money. If you're going to lock them out, mortgage, if you're I don't want to pick on any one firm. If you're XYZ firm moving to ABC firm and XYZ firm files an injunction, you can't call them. There's nothing that keeps that client from transferring all their money to Fidelity. They can do whatever they want. So
it's not the client they get; it's the advisor. Yeah. You have to be working in one of these, a blue state, not a red state. California is very liberal in laws, so does New York. Yeah. And if you're there, you got a little bit better shake. It's hard everywhere else.
Yeah, good point. So we have gone way over here. I'm going to answer a couple more questions, but whoever's got to drop off here, just know this. We're going to send a recording of this webinar, my contact information and all of that. There's also going to be a link. I would love to have an individual conversation with any and all who are out there that have any questions about either a local level or national level kind of recruitment, what we're seeing. I think those conversations are best usually saved for one-on-one type situations anyway, because everybody does have a unique, to some degree, proposition. So a couple more things here, though, that are very interesting is, all right, what are the stats regarding the effectiveness of paying an upfront money to an advisor team upon joining? Are you at a disadvantage by not paying it? Yeah, you're at a huge disadvantage by not paying it, in my opinion. I do. However, I think it hurts you probably more at the very beginning of the process than, once you get further along, if you can show an advisor, hey, here's the upfront money. I think everybody's onto it now. It's not free money. It's a promissory note, and it's got to come from somewhere else. I think, we've seen some successful situations where it's, hey, here's an option one. If you do want some front type money, it's a 7 or 8 year promissory note. Here's that. But, oh, by the way, your payout's going to be lower, and here's the other things. And over the life of the loan, you would actually be better off not taking any money up front for tax reasons and a lot of other reasons and actually get a higher payout. That being said, it's a huge catalyst to get people to move who are going to, you're fighting inertia with any advisor, even if they're wanting to move. Unless there's something going on, the process of moving your book is difficult and it's time consuming. And so any incentive you can do to help that along, to offset the loss of income that they may have for a short period of time, is going to make a big difference. We always make a little bit of a joke. It's not about the money until it is. All things being equal, it's not really about the money. When we get into situations with candidates we represent, if you have 3 or 4 firms that are looking at a group, and the front money's similar, it's not always exactly the same, but it's within the same bracket, then yeah, it's not about the money. That if there's just not any money at all, it's hard to get to that next step. You may not even have the opportunity to sell your culture or anything else. As far as getting a recruiter to work for you, if you says, hey, we don't do upfront money and our package isn't that good, but we're a heck of a group to work with, probably going to have a hard time getting a recruiter. So I think that's kind of an individual situation. A lot of times you may have ownership, though, in the practice and some other types of benefits. Then I think that's situational. All right, so a few more here while we're going. But yeah, as far as front money goes, I think it's important. We're even seeing front money on the independent side. 15 to, I'll say on the low end, 10% up to 30%, somewhere in that range, depending on business mix. You're going to be at a disadvantage from a recruiting standpoint if you're not in that ballpark. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's probably going to be very difficult to drive any kind of hiring with scale under that situation. So it's something we'd certainly love to talk with you about and see if you're in the ballpark. All right, let's see here. Do I recommend local cable advertisements on CNBC, MSNBC, etc.? And I'm going to say this for reps. I would say from starting purposes, no. And here's what you want to avoid is when you advertise on those platforms first is you're competing with entities that want to sell potential clients items as well as mutual funds, ETFs, insurance companies wanting to wholesale their products to the advisory community. So they're going to a lot of times bid up the price of advertising. I think you're far better off being on something very, very specific first. Broker Hunter, Advisor Hub, there's some other ones out there that are going to be, generally super hyper targeted, and you're not going to be paying for, an audience that's, in a lot of cases, particularly CNBC, most of the audience that watches it's, not even an advisor. So, that's just a probably not a good spend of advertising dollars. Although, you certainly would, be in front of some reps, but you'd also be paying for, everybody else that's on there as well from a marketing standpoint. So I think when we're talking about marketing and advertising, it's a tiny audience, and I'm Tony. I think what is there really 5 or 6 different publications or out there that would target this audience in some segment. I mean, do you have any input on that? I mean, we always
you want to be. This is you want to be as targeted as possible because you can't say anything on a TV spot or what we're selling is complicated and what you're doing is complicated. Right. So you can't do it in a banner ad or a picture of you on TV for 2 minutes. That doesn't make any sense. You need to be and you need to make it complicated and explain in detail what it is. So you need to find a form to do that, which is why we built our form the way we did. But you have to find somewhere that you can let people get your message and understand what it is you do. Because what's the difference between you and Hightower, between you and Stewart Partners, between you and Merrill Lynch, between you and LPL? You better be able to describe that. And you can't do it in a banner, or on a TV spot. You have to get down to the real meat of it, and that's what you got to do.
Now, one thing here is there is a mention here of local cable on CNBC. Yeah, if you're in a small market, I mean, and it's not going to, be incredibly expensive, try it. I think, again, we're in a small metro North Atlanta suburb of Forsyth County called Cumming, Georgia. It's probably 100,000 people. You could, probably run a local cable ad if it was demographically targeted very specifically to just the zip codes up here. It might work. I think there's better places to go. I don't want to completely dismiss it because, everything works some of the time. So, I think you can certainly do a little bit of that.
In my mind, the only way that works in my mind is if you're out there really heavily in the field and you say, hey, man, did you see my commercial? Did you see my commercial?
Mm-hmm.
You get a clip of the commercial, you put it on your website, you get a clip of the commercial, you put it on the bottom of your email link. It's still going to matter how you do it. But the commercial is just going to, it's just going to be what it is. It's not going to be a lot of information.
Now, I would use it probably to, where I think a local commercial might make some sense is if you are using it to promote your firm's services out to the general market for wealth management. Because all the reps that are in that area, it could serve a two-pronged purpose of, you're generating name and brand awareness and recognition there, probably going to get some accounts from it over time. But, secondarily, you have a good chance of having the advisor see that so that when, as Tony had indicated, when you're making those calls, which we keep coming back to, you've got to do that. You've got you've softened them up a little bit. They've heard of you. Hey, I've seen your ads. How are those working for you? Oh, it's great. We do seminars and, we're growing and, and let it segue into recruiting conversation. So all of this kind of goes hand in hand. I think, that's something to maybe keep in mind. Somebody had asked about, and I had thrown this up here, and I apologize I didn't elaborate on this because we kind of jumped through it, but I said, do not send experienced financial advisors through applicant tracking systems, okay? And that's a terminology, and this doesn't really apply to branch offices. I guess it could in a sense that if you're national, if your firm nationally is running advertisements and they say, okay, we're going to start doing job postings, but we're going to make these advisors, and big companies are notorious for this, we're going to make them fill out an online application, real extensive, and go through our applicant tracking system and all of that. They don't do that. So you do not want to make these candidates, especially these producing FAs, do anything other than click a button, one time really quick and talk to them. What we're trying to do as quick as we can is we have got to get somebody that's starting to engage in the process of looking for a job to be talking to you and engaging with you, real one-on-one as fast as we can. That's where it all goes down. The rest of it's just sourcing. We have to have the pipeline full from the top in order to get the results we want. But, ultimately it comes down to your recruiting team, your package, your deal, and how good they are at moving people along the process. That's going to determine how successful you are in this. But it all does start with sourcing, and I'm going to close out on this. I've kept you all for 30 minutes longer than we should have, and I will go and certainly try to get back with everybody whose questions I didn't get to. Is the one takeaway from this call, regardless of whether you're using referrals, networking, advertising, or all three of these together, is when you figure out what it is, the metric you're trying to drive, ultimately with the number of hires that would be meaningful to your branch, your region, your firm, you need to back into that because that number is so lagging behind the activities you do today that if you want to hire 10, we have to really do everything we can to drive the activities to make sure we get you 100 qualified candidates in the pipeline now, like immediately, as fast as humanly possible. I mean, again, there's not a ton of them out there, but it's certainly, that has to happen first before the other good stuff happens down the road. And these items we discussed today, while none of them are a magic bullet, are all of critical importance when you're trying to drive that pipeline. So with that being said, Tony, I appreciate your time today. You may have had to jump. Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's, having somebody join us that's actually been in the trenches and done it is hugely valuable. And I think, as Tony had touched on, it's relatively simple when you write it down. You say, "Oh, is that all there is to it?" It's the execution of the strategy and of the day-to-day activities that are going to determine whether or not, in most cases, you're going to be successful recruiting. So with that being said, I thank everybody for your time. I am going to send out an email here in about an hour with a recording of the webinar. There will be a link in there for you when you're ready to schedule a call with us. We'd love to talk to you about some of these items we discussed. If you do have an interest in talking about some opportunities on Advisor Hub or Broker Hunter, we'll be happy to talk with you about those as well. And we appreciate everybody's time today and wish you all the best of luck in 2018. Take care. Bye-bye.